Robin Cornell was born on November 30th, 1978, in sunny Florida. She was the younger of two sisters and was raised by her devoted mother, Jan, who had taken on the role of both parents after their father stepped out of their lives. Jan poured everything she had into her daughters, determined to give them a safe and loving home. When Robin was 10 years old, the two of them moved to Cape Coral, a quiet coastal town where Jan had landed a job at the local hospital. She found a cozy townhouse just minutes from work. With her older daughter already off at college, it was now just Jan and Robin, mother and daughter, side by side. Robin quickly embraced her new surroundings. She made friends at school with ease, joined sports teams, and became known for her kindness and love of animals. She once found an injured bird, brought it home, and cared for it until it could fly again. That was Robin, compassionate, full of life, and curious about the world. Jan, too, found happiness. She settled into her new job and began dating a man named Donald, her first serious relationship in years. After so long spent putting her children first, Jan was finally carving out space for herself. At work, she also met Lisa, a friendly woman who would become her closest friend. In early May 1990, knowing Lisa was struggling financially, Jan invited her to move into their townhouse. With a spare room upstairs and the added benefit of splitting rent, it seemed like a perfect arrangement. Lisa and 11-year-old Robin hit it off immediately. Lisa even offered to help with babysitting while Jan worked night shifts at the hospital. Then came the night that would change everything. On May 9th, just a week after Lisa moved in, Jan planned to spend the evening at Donald's house watching a game. She hesitated at first. She didn't want to leave Lisa alone with Robin for too long. But Lisa assured her it was no problem. Comforted by the offer, Jan left for Donald's, planning to return before dawn for her early shift at the hospital. But she fell asleep on the couch. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel. Your support means a lot to us and helps us grow. A huge thank you to everyone who's been watching. When Jan woke around 3 a.m., she quickly gathered her things and drove home. As she reached the front door, something felt off. The door was locked, both locks, but Lisa only had a key to the top lock. That wasn't all. As Jan fumbled with her keys, she heard footsteps inside, just for a moment, then silence. She knocked. No answer. Now seriously alarmed, Jan walked around to the back of the house. There, she found the sliding door slightly ajar, something she never allowed. Still hoping for an innocent explanation, she told herself Lisa might have let the cats out and forgotten to close it. She stepped inside. The house was dark. The silence was heavy. As she walked into the kitchen, her stomach dropped. Family photos, normally hanging on the living room wall, were now neatly arranged on an ironing board. Photos of Robin and her older sister placed side by side, as if on display. There was no reason for them to be there. The home was in disarray. Furniture overturned, items broken. A violent struggle had taken place. Jan ran upstairs to Robin's room. What she saw would haunt her forever. Robin was lying face down beside her bed, her body bruised and partially undressed. She was cold to the touch. Jan rushed to her, desperate to save her daughter, but it was already too late. Still, in her shock and disbelief, Jan called 911 and tried to resuscitate her little girl. Though somewhere deep down, she already knew the truth. Robin was gone. As the ambulance sped toward the townhouse, Jan's anguished cries pierced the early morning silence. Her screams echoed through the complex, waking several neighbors who stepped outside to see what was happening. She was hysterical, pleading for help, calling out Robin's name, desperately trying to make sense of what she had just seen. Police were the first to arrive. They rushed upstairs to Robin's bedroom and confirmed what Jan already knew. Her 11-year-old daughter was dead. But the horror wasn't over. In one of the other rooms, officers discovered a second body. It was 32-year-old Lisa, lying motionless on the bed, covered in bruises. She, too, was dead. The crime scene was immediately sealed off, and both bodies were sent to the medical examiner. Meanwhile, detectives began combing the house for clues, and they didn't have to look far. They quickly found several cigarette butts scattered throughout the home, none of which belonged to either John or Lisa. On Jan's nightstand sat a mysterious set of car keys, the kind used for older Toyota models from the 1980s. No one in the house owned such a vehicle. It seemed the killer may have accidentally left them behind, or left them intentionally, for reasons unknown. Detectives made another disturbing observation. The shower had been recently used, and there was evidence that the killer had washed off blood after the murders. Even more puzzling, the perpetrator had left a pair of socks in the bedroom. Why he did so remained unclear. With Jan's help, police began taking inventory. Several of Lisa's personal belongings were missing. Her driver's license, credit cards, checkbook, and most notably, a watch she had been planning to give to her boyfriend. The watch wasn't valuable, but it had sentimental weight. An engraved message from Lisa to the man she loved. To investigators, the choice of stolen items was strange. The watch, with its personal inscription, would be easily traceable. Any use of the stolen credit cards could be tracked. Why would someone who had just committed a double homicide take such risky, easily identifiable items? Then there were the photos. Family portraits of Robin and her older sister, once displayed on the living room wall, now neatly arranged on an ironing board in the kitchen. It felt symbolic, deliberate. Detectives believed it might have been a message, directed at Jan, or perhaps even the police. Recognizing the severity of the case, local law enforcement requested assistance from the state police. Soon, a team of forensic experts arrived, bringing with them the most advanced tools available at the time. Their first discovery: the killer had entered through a ground-floor bedroom window, slicing through the protective screen to gain access. Once inside, he made his way to Robin's room. On her bed, technicians found biological material, immediately sent to the lab for analysis. Although DNA testing existed in 1990, results weren't instant. Investigators had to wait days, possibly weeks. Meanwhile, the autopsies were conducted. Both Robin and Lisa had suffered numerous blunt force injuries, followed by asphyxiation. Medical examiners determined that pillows had been used to smother them. The damage told a story of brutality and control, but there was worse to come. The forensic team discovered that both victims had been sexually assaulted. Disturbingly, experts concluded the assaults likely occurred after death. Biological samples were collected from Robin's body and fast-tracked for testing. A single male hair was also recovered from Lisa's body. It, too, was sent to the lab for analysis. While forensic specialists worked behind the scenes, police turned their attention to the next step: finding a suspect. Someone capable of such violence, who had left traces behind, and perhaps might already be closer than anyone realized. Not long after the investigation began, detectives received their first real lead, one that hinted at something far more sinister than a random attack. Jan told police that for 3 nights prior to the murders, she had been woken by strange noises outside her home. She recalled hearing the gate creaking, followed by what sounded like someone trying the handle of the sliding back door. Each time she peered into the darkness, but couldn't make out anyone clearly. Still, the unease lingered. Then came the morning of May 9th, just hours before the killings. As daylight filtered into her room, Jan opened her eyes to find a man standing outside her window, staring in at her. He smiled, then vanished. The moment chilled her, but unsure of what she'd seen and unable to get a good look at the man's face, Jan didn't call the police. She assumed he might be a neighbor, as the townhouses in her complex were all connected. Maybe it was just a misunderstanding. Maybe. Now, with 2 people dead, detectives weren't willing to take chances. They launched a widespread search, starting with Jan's neighbors. They checked not only the residents of her building, but extended the investigation to the surrounding area. Every man in the vicinity was questioned. Their alibis for the night of the murders were scrutinized, and officers began collecting DNA samples. This process narrowed the pool. Of the many men investigated, 19 were flagged as potential suspects. That list was eventually trimmed to 10, but no one could be definitively linked to the crime. No one stood out. Meanwhile, the lab had confirmed a critical finding. The DNA recovered from Robin's body, the sheets and the pillow, all belonged to the same unknown male. It was a single perpetrator. But when the DNA profile was run through the FBI database, there were no matches. Equally frustrating, some of the neighbors refused to provide DNA. Among them, one man began to draw particular attention. Neighbors whispered about him, how he'd been seen peeping through windows, how his behavior had made people uncomfortable. Though he had never been arrested, the stories were enough to raise alarms. Then, shortly after the murders, he suddenly relocated, leaving Florida and moving to Missouri. The timing alone was suspicious. Investigators followed the trail. They tracked the man down, traveled out of state, and questioned him. But despite the red flags, they couldn't conclusively link him to the crime. There was no physical evidence tying him to the scene. When detectives showed Jan a photograph of the man, she paused. She said he did resemble the figure she had seen outside her window that morning. Still, without a clear view and no DNA match, her statement wasn't enough to make an arrest. The man remained on their radar, but for now, his involvement, like so much else in this case, remained uncertain. As investigators scrambled for answers, another neighbor came forward with a troubling observation. She reported seeing a strange car slowly cruising through the townhouse complex the day before the murders. It wasn't familiar. The vehicle crept between the buildings, and behind the wheel was a man wearing a red cap. Something about him seemed off. She took note, but by the time detectives followed up, the car and its driver had vanished. Despite their best efforts, police were never able to track him down. Detectives also pursued another promising lead, the Toyota car keys found in Jan's bedroom. They initiated a broad search, attempting to identify every local owner of vehicles matching that make and model from the 1980s. But again, the investigation hit a wall. No matches, no suspects. Attention then shifted to Lisa. Given that the killer had taken deeply personal items, including the engraved watch she had planned to gift her boyfriend, investigators began to wonder if this was more than a random attack. Could this have been personal? They thoroughly investigated Lisa's boyfriend, as well as former partners, friends, and colleagues. But no one in her circle could be linked to the murders. No evidence, no motive, nothing solid. As the weeks turned into months, the case began to stall. Detectives continued their work behind the scenes, interviewing new suspects, collecting DNA samples, hoping for a match. But every single lead ended the same way. A dead end. Meanwhile, Jan Cornell was relentless. She pleaded with the public, again and again, begging for any shred of information that might help identify her daughter's killer. What baffled her most was the silence. Despite the brutality of the murders, not a single neighbor reported hearing screams or any signs of struggle that night. Investigators believed the killer would have made a significant amount of noise. But somehow, no one heard a thing. The murders of Robin and Lisa soon captured national attention. Media coverage spread across the country, generating hundreds of tips. Each was followed up. None brought answers. Then, about a year later, a chilling new figure emerged. A 27-year-old man living nearby confessed to 3 separate murders committed over several years. He even told police that if he wasn't locked away for life, he'd kill again. Detectives wondered, could he be responsible for the deaths of Robin and Lisa? They launched a full investigation into his background, movements, and connections. But ultimately, he was ruled out. His crimes, as gruesome as they were, had no link to the Cape Coral case, and so, the trail went cold once more. For years, the case remained open but stagnant. Jan occasionally gave interviews to local news outlets, each time expressing the same heartbreaking hope that one day justice would come, that someone somewhere would speak up. Police insisted the case was never closed, but privately they admitted there were no new leads, no breakthroughs, just a mother's voice echoing through time, waiting for the silence to break. In 2005, 15 years after the murders of Robin Cornell and Lisa Story, the case was reopened in a renewed effort to bring long-awaited justice. For the first time in years, funding was allocated to allow one detective to work on the case full-time for 6 months. Hopes were cautiously high. But despite the detective's commitment and meticulous review of the cold file, the investigation once again hit a dead end. Years passed. The evidence remained shelved. Leads dried up. Forensic science had advanced, but the name of the killer still remained unknown. Then, in August 2016, something completely unexpected happened. In a town just 6 miles from Jan Cornell's home, local police arrested a 54-year-old man after a domestic dispute turned violent. He had fired an air rifle at his adult son during an argument. Fortunately, the son wasn't seriously injured, but the arrest triggered a legal requirement. The man had to provide a DNA sample for the state database. That single act, routine and procedural, would crack open the case. Within days, cold case detectives received the alert they had waited decades for. The DNA profile from the newly arrested man matched all 3 semen samples collected from the crime scene back in 1990. His name was Joseph Zieler. Investigators acted quickly. Although he was already in custody, they obtained a fresh direct DNA sample from Zieler to confirm the match beyond any doubt. The original biological evidence, painstakingly preserved for over 26 years, was pulled from storage and tested against the new sample. The results were conclusive. Zieler's DNA perfectly matched the semen found on Robin's body, her bedsheets, and the pillow. There was no ambiguity. Science had finally caught up with a killer. At the time of the murders, Joseph Zieler had been 28 years old. His criminal history included petty thefts, drug charges, and weapons violations. Nothing that would have required a DNA sample at the time. Just 2 months after the killings, he was arrested for selling stolen goods and possessing an illegal firearm, but he served only a short sentence. Because of outdated laws, no genetic profile was collected, and he flew under the radar. Zieler's name had never appeared in the original investigation. He lived in a nearby town, just outside the circle of suspicion. For 26 years, he had remained a phantom in plain sight. Following the DNA confirmation, Joseph Zieler was arrested for the murders of Robin Cornell and Lisa Story. Prosecutors wasted no time in announcing their intent to pursue the death penalty. Zieler, however, maintained his innocence, claiming he had nothing to do with the crimes. He was booked into jail, where he remained for years as both sides prepared for what would be one of the most anticipated trials in Florida's recent history. That trial finally began on May 8, 2023, almost 33 years to the day since Robin and Lisa were brutally killed. With multiple DNA samples tying him directly to the crime scene, and more damningly, to Robin Cornell's body, Joseph Zieler's chances of escaping justice were slim. Prosecutors anticipated a straightforward trial. The evidence was overwhelming, but no one, not even the most seasoned courtroom observers, could have predicted how Zieler would behave once the trial began. From the start, his erratic, explosive conduct turned the courtroom into a national spectacle, capturing the attention of millions across the country. The prosecution laid out its case in methodical, devastating detail. The cornerstone of their argument was the 3 DNA samples collected from Robin's body, her pillow, and the bedsheets. The prosecutor argued that the death penalty was not only warranted, but necessary. According to him, Zieler's actions were calculated and cold-blooded. He had ample time to reconsider, to stop, but instead, he carried out a brutal double murder, sexually assaulted his victims, stole personal items, arranged family photos, and even took a shower before leaving the scene. In all the years since his arrest, Zieler had shown no remorse. He had nearly 7 years in custody, 7 years to come clean, to provide answers, to offer some measure of closure to the grieving families. Instead, he had remained defiant. When the defense finally presented its case, it was clear they had little to stand on. With DNA evidence beyond dispute, Zieler's attorney didn't try to refute the match. Instead, he floated a vague theory that someone else had committed the murders, and Zieler had no motive to kill either Robin or Lisa. He even suggested that the real killer may have known Jan Cornell and was targeting her specifically. Then came Zieler's turn on the stand, and the courtroom descended into chaos. He screamed at jurors, shouted insults at the prosecutor, and even berated his own legal team, flipping them off in front of the court. His behavior was shocking, erratic, and deeply unsettling. When pressed on how his DNA ended up on Robin's pillow and bedding, Zieler offered a new and outrageous explanation. He claimed he had slept with Jan Cornell, Robin's mother, months before the murders. He sneered as he said it, adding that if his DNA was still present, it was because she never washed her sheets, calling her a pig. Jan, sitting just feet away, had to listen in silence. Through tears and disbelief, she told the court she had never seen this man before his arrest. She had never invited him into her home, let alone had any relationship with him. To dismantle Zieler's fabrication, the prosecution brought in a forensic expert who explained in no uncertain terms the semen samples were fresh. Lab documentation confirmed this. Had they been months old, it would have been immediately evident during the initial investigation. Even more damning, one of the samples was recovered from Robin's body, entirely discrediting Zieler's desperate lie. But Zieler didn't stop. He turned his fury back on Jan, lashing out with more obscenities while his own attorneys begged him to stop. They warned him that his behavior was only helping the prosecution's case. He didn't care. He refused to listen. When the trial came to a close, it took the jury just 5 hours to reach a verdict, a strikingly short deliberation for a capital case. Joseph Zieler was found guilty of the murders of Robin Cornell and Lisa Story. Now it was up to the court to decide his fate. Joseph Zieler's behavior during sentencing shocked the courtroom yet again, but more on that in a moment. Following the guilty verdict, Zieler's defense team made one final push to spare his life. They pleaded with the court to drop the death penalty, arguing that Joseph had endured a difficult childhood under the control of an extremely strict father. They also claimed he suffered from undiagnosed mental disorders, suggesting he lacked full culpability for his crimes. The defense added another twist, alleging that Joseph had lost his memory in 1998 after a motorcycle accident, rendering him unable to recall details of the murders. But the prosecution was ready. Psychological experts, who had evaluated Zieler at length, testified that there was no evidence to support any of these claims. In their professional opinion, Joseph was mentally competent, fully aware of his actions, and capable of premeditated violence. He was, they said, entirely fit to face the death penalty. In late June 2023, Joseph Zieler was escorted back into court for the final sentencing phase. The courtroom, already tense, held its breath as he entered. Then came a moment no one expected. As Zieler approached his seat, he leaned in toward his attorney, and suddenly, without warning, he drove his elbow into the side of his own lawyer's head. Gasps filled the courtroom as security officers rushed in and restrained him. Despite the unprovoked attack, the attorney declined to press charges and continued representing Zieler to the end. But there was nothing more he could do. Shortly after, the judge imposed the ultimate sentence: death. Joseph Zieler was taken away and transferred to prison, where he awaits execution to this day. For Jan Cornell and Lisa Story's family, it was the justice they had waited more than 3 decades to see. Though Zieler never once admitted guilt, the overwhelming physical evidence, his DNA on the victims and at the scene, left no room for doubt. In the end, the families could finally breathe again. Jan and Lisa's loved ones publicly thanked the investigators, prosecutors, and everyone who fought to solve a case that had haunted their lives for so long. But the darkness didn't end with Joseph. In a disturbing postscript to the trial, in February 2024, authorities arrested Zieler's 32-year-old son on charges of possessing illegal materials involving minors. He now faces a potential prison sentence of his own, and if convicted, he could be incarcerated in the very same facility where his father now sits on death row. Be sure to let us know what you think of the story in the comments below. And if you like this video, smash the like button and don't forget to subscribe. A playlist is going to pop up right now with more videos you'll love. See you guys next time.